Hey, this is David Plotz, CEO of CityCast. I have a favor to ask before we get to today's conversation. We're doing our annual listener survey, and it would really help us out if you took it. And even if you took it last year, we'd be grateful if you took it again, because we can't use last year's data. Please go to citycast.fm/survey to take the survey. It's only 7 minutes long, we know, because we timed it. That's citycast.fm/survey. And when you take the survey, you'll also be eligible to win a $250 Visa gift card and CityCast swag, that great CityCast swag. citycast.fm/survey.
Today on CityCast Boise, we're diving into the fallout from Trump's January 6 pardons, including a local ex-MAGA granny who turned hers down. And we're crunching the numbers on a proposed pay raise for state employees and judges. Plus, we're exploring different ways to build your community. It's Friday, January 24th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Once again, happy Friday, everyone. And joining me today is political scientist Charlie Hunt. Thanks for joining us again for another Friday show.
Happy Friday once again, Lindsay. Great to be here.
I mean, let's just jump into a story that I know has been making lots of waves on Reddit and all over, and that is Trump's pardons for the January 6th insurrectionists. And we can bring that back to Boise because there were actually 7 people in Idaho who were charged, who were in the Capitol on January 6th or trying to get into the Capitol. Some of them were dangling, but trying to get into the Capitol. And people have a lot of feelings about this. This wasn't that long ago. It is in recent memory, and it sent an interesting message. And so I'm really curious, what are your biggest takeaways from this and its impact locally?
Well, I have, as someone who teaches about Congress, who studies Congress, I have a lot of very personal thoughts on this. I teach a course on Congress. I wrote a textbook on it that I use in the class. And I usually open the class with a story to demonstrate to my students just how much I care about Congress. And I'll keep it short. But for a few years now, I've worn a smartwatch that tracks my daily average heart rate, and it varies from day to day. So I have like some super zen low heart rate days, and then some on the other side of the spectrum where my heart's working overtime. Because I'm an insufferable nerd, I downloaded all the data, threw it in a spreadsheet, and wouldn't you know it, of the nearly 2,000 days of heart rate data I clocked between 2019 and 2025, the number one least restful day for me over the past 5.5 years was January 6, 2021. And I mentioned that because, you mentioned, Lindsay, it was not a long time ago, and yet we've either, it seems like, completely forgotten what happened or made this significant effort to rewrite history about what happened. This was a violent insurrection attempt. People died. Police officers died on the day and after. And frankly, it's just been watching the anniversary roll by a couple weeks ago, and then watching all these pardons, even though I think we knew they were coming to some extent, has been frankly heartbreaking for me as someone who really cares about Congress, cares about our government, and wants it to do a good job. So sorry to start out on such a personal note, but that's just where my head's at, watching all this unfold.
No, I think what's important about this is it is personal. Like we all lived through it. I have a similar story. I was working the night shift when this all happened. And so I had, got the kids off to school, gone to bed, and my husband burst into the bedroom at like 11 in the morning. And I'd only been asleep for like 2 hours. So I sat up and I was like, the house better be on fire or we better be under attack because there's no other reason for you to come in this room right now. And he was like, there's an insurrection. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, no, then I guess, I'm not sleeping today. So that, very similar story. And it is personal because we all it was scary. I didn't ever think I'd see something like that. Like you said, people died. And then the gaslighting narratives afterwards were so infuriating. And so I think this story ultimately is very personal, and that's why so much comes up about it. And one of the stories that really has made headlines locally about this is about Pam Hemphill, or the MAGA granny. She now calls herself the Ex-MAGA granny, because she was at the Capitol. She was in the Capitol building and was part of the insurrection, but she has refused President Trump's pardon and said that it is a slap in the face to the police officers, that she has changed her perspective. She multiple times has said that she feels like she's pulled herself from the cult. Is that a common thing, to reject a presidential pardon? Is that something that happens often?
No, it is not. This is not common at all. I mean, truthfully, when we're talking about pardons, and we've seen a lot of them recently because now former President Biden issued a whole bunch right before he left office, including to some family members and other folks that, he believed were targets of the incoming administration, sort of political targets. And probably 99% of the time, if you're issuing a pardon to someone or commuting their sentence, which presidents are empowered to do in the Constitution, it is either done in coordination with them or with their families, and usually that is something you want to happen to you. In this case, I think this is a special case, not only because I think Hemphill stands probably almost alone among a lot of these rioters, right? I mean, a lot of these folks were, celebrating these pardons. Their families were celebrating the pardons. One of the folks who had been arrested was spotted eating lunch in the Capitol yesterday, and sort of kind of rubbing it in the faces of all his enemies, or however we want to think about it. But no, I think it's incredibly rare, and it's actually, Lindsay, not even clear that it's possible. There's some Supreme Court precedents around here that maybe demonstrate that you can't legally turn down a presidential pardon. This is something that's being worked out in the courts right now. Hemphill said she's talking to her attorney about it. In terms of the legal impact, this is fairly low stakes, right? This was a misdemeanor offense. It would really be about her remaining, I think, probation time. But it is a symbolic act regardless. And I think that's why it's been making so many waves. Like, I heard about this not even in the Statesman where it originally broke, but in the New York Times, right? She was interviewed on CNN, and this is everywhere. I think she's been out there making a lot of the same points we just made, that like, this was violent. We shouldn't forget what happened. And they're trying to rewrite history. And so that's why I think this is making a big impact.
I think something that's very interesting, and this is something that I personally also wrestle with this, is Hemphill was very active in the far-right community locally. And so it's been interesting to watch this transformation with her, or this redemption arc, because I was at various rallies around the Treasure Valley where she would be filming, where she would be streaming it to, white supremacist groups. She was very involved in Ammon Bundy's People's Rights Network. And I got very, very scary threats from them sometimes. She was adjacently involved in trying to get the Meridian Library District dissolved. And so it was really in like 2023 where we started to see this pivot with her away from that. And so I think, she talks about how the left hasn't really embraced her. I think it is tricky, where I appreciate that she can see it now. But it is, I think there's a complicated relationship in this area with those who've been involved in these movements for a while, where it's tricky to build that trust after that. We love a redemption arc. We love somebody that's all we all really want, right? Is somebody who's deep into MAGA to be like, yours, I was wrong. But it is a little complicated.
I agree it's complicated. I mean, I tend to think, that there was sort of a different version of this discussion, I feel like, going on over the past, particularly during the last election cycle, when you saw folks like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger out sort of campaigning for Democrats and sort of giving their end of the story. And I think a lot of Democrats, particularly on the farther left, saying like, easy does it. Like, we don't need a Cheney out here, telling us what we should be doing with the Democratic candidates or things like that. On the other hand, in politics, you have to build broad coalitions. You have to have allies from a bunch of different parts of the spectrum. And when you are dealing with, Hemphill has used the cult language. I don't know how comfortable I am using that particular word, but you do have this very isolated news environment, media environment that the far right, that's sort of the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, is involved in. And when you have that happening, you need folks who are in there and who understand that to be able to then come out the other side and say, here's what I experienced, here's what happened, and here are the kinds of things that drove me to sort of recant and rethink what happened, and then to ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to other people. And so I do think it's a really valuable perspective to have when thinking about how to ensure that something like January 6th, God forbid, never happens again.
Yeah. And I think that is such a good perspective, because I'm also someone who has radically changed my political, social, economic views in 10, 12 years. And that has been helpful for me to say, this is how they're thinking. This is why they're doing what they're doing. And so I do agree that having that perspective, okay, what really was effective? Why did you believe that? How can we counter that? How can we approach that? Is a very important perspective to have. And I'm curious to see, as this administration goes on, if we will see more of those perspectives emerge, and then how involved they want to be in working on changing the narrative.
Do you plan your vacations based on whether you can speak the local language? With Babbel, language no longer has to be the barrier. I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast, and I went to Mexico City a couple of years ago with my girlfriend, who's a native Spanish speaker, so I just let her do all the talking, like all of it. I adored the city, and now I'm going to go back in a couple of months, but with my college roommates, who are a bunch of middle-aged men, none of us Spanish speakers. When I was younger, I might not have been bold enough to do that, but now I'm not anxious because Babbel has me covered. Thanks to Babbel, I know how to order a taxi, how to give directions, how to order in a restaurant, all the small and useful bits of language that make international travel easier. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons, handcrafted by over 200 language experts, get you to begin speaking your new language in 3 weeks or whatever pace you choose. And because conversing is the key to really understanding each other in a new language, Babbel is designed using practical, real-world conversations, especially of the sort you need while traveling. Food, how to get places. Babbel's tips and tools are inspired by the real-life stuff you actually need when communicating. With a focus on conversation, you'll be ready to talk wherever you go. So I hope I'll see you in Mexico in a couple of months. Or, as we say, espero verte en Mexico en un par de meses. So let's get more of you talking in a new language. Babbel is gifting CityCast listeners 60% off subscriptions at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike Big Wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
So, Charlie, another topic I definitely want to make sure that we talk about today is that JFAC, or the Budget Committee for the state of Idaho, the state of Idaho legislature, has discussed potential pay raises for state employees and judges. And as a state employee, is this unexpected? Is this, I'm really curious your thoughts on this and whether you think it's likely in this political environment.
I'm not sure whether it's unexpected or not. I'm happy to have it. But yes, I am a state employee. But, there's also a lot of, I think, interesting policy reasons to talk about whether or not we should, the legislature and the governor should approve some of these different kinds of raises. We've got 25,000 state employees. A couple of different numbers have been kicked around. Late last year, the Idaho Division of Human Resources recommended 4% raises for state employees. Governor Little recommended 5% raises for all state employees. And so this is something they're sort of debating now. And, it's not just because all state employees like me are so great that you want to reward them, but you want to retain talent within the state. A lot of the proposals that cited the need for some of these raises, including the Division of Human Resources, talked about turnover, right? Employee turnover for the state, and that state employees are underpaid, and so they can go do the same job virtually in other places and get paid better. And I think this connects to an important sort of principle of state government and federal government, for that matter, that is kind of a hobby horse of mine, which is that, if you look at any business, how do they get the best employees? How do they get the best performance out of their employees? They offer them good salaries and benefits. And, in my view, if we want state government to do a good job, then we should treat them no differently. And I believe that whether I was in the group of state employees or not.
Absolutely. And just like from the little world I occupied, I had a friend who worked for the Department of Health and Welfare and was trying to get different programs going with nurses for recently postpartum families, lots of different health initiatives that they were trying to do for people in the Treasure Valley. And her biggest issue was she could not keep nurses, and the amount of pay that they were offering experienced nurses, they wanted nurses with experience, was nearly $10 less than what a new grad could make at a local hospital. And so it was so difficult for them to get nurses, to keep nurses, to be able to have these programs. And like you said, I'm just really curious, though. It doesn't seem like our legislature necessarily looks at that holistic perspective when making these decisions. I think a lot of times it's input, cost, output, what are we getting this year, this moment, not can we build a sustainable structure for our state for the next 10, 12, 15, 20 years. And so I'm really curious, do you think our legislature has shifted more to the right? There's lots of talks about we need to cut, quote unquote, bureaucracy and get rid of waste. And do you think that this is actually something that they will truly look at, consider, and potentially pass? Or do you think they talked about it, it's going to be tabled and not addressed?
It's hard to say. I mean, it was not rejected outright by JFAC. They haven't, to my knowledge, they haven't set a new date to sort of consider the state employee pay question. This stuff can get politically tricky, I think, regardless of party in certain ways. That if you're talking about that, it's a lot of times it's useful for either party to talk about, being judicious with government and with the government budget and things like that. I think this is particularly the case when we're talking about the salaries of public officials. And this, I think, is also where, we can bring into the discussion around judicial pay. This was something that the Idaho Supreme Court Chief Justice G. Richard Bevin talked about in the State of the Judiciary address, and some data that the courts released recently talking about how, Idaho Supreme Court justices ranked 50th among the United States and its territories in Supreme Court judicial pay, and that district judges ranked 48th out of 53 states and territories. Our salaries for judges are way lower than all of the states that surround us. And this, I think, gets tricky because, a lot of voters are not so happy with their government, are not so happy with politicians, and the idea of giving politicians and elected leaders a raise is probably about one of the most unpopular positions you could possibly take as an elected representative. And so I give Bevin credit for doing this and standing up and saying this. And so politically, I think this is really tricky as well.
I agree. And I thought Bevin made a good and a point that needed to be made that, justices are leaving early. Don't we want good judges? Not saying that like with lower pay, we'd have, if you're taking lesser pay, I don't think you're a lesser judge. But like, if you have that experience, you have that ability, just like any other job, why wouldn't you go where you could get the most money, the most compensation for the job that you're doing? And so I feel like that's something that has to be part of this conversation. I want quality judges. I mean, our state has a lot of things that end up getting challenged from the legislature, and I would like really experienced judges to evaluate it who, are very, I want the cream of the crop evaluating that, not, who we got because they're like, I'll take it. It's fine. It's Idaho, whatever.
Yeah, and Justice Bevin made this point, basically saying that the workloads for Idaho judges are really enormous, right? And that the courts are sort of unique in this way in that they have to render judgments on everything that comes across their desk, right? So one judge can have to deal with hundreds of different cases per year, and that, justices then don't have as much time to research their cases, write their decisions, and so the quality of work suffers as a result. And the other thing I want to bring in here too, Lindsay, I have an even more unpopular opinion than raising judicial salaries, which is that we should raise the salaries of elected leaders across the board, including members of Congress. And part of that for me is because if you keep the salary really low, then you are only going to attract people to the job who are wealthy enough to run for these offices to begin with. It is part of the big reason why we have such a wealth disparity in Congress. My members of Congress are so much wealthier than the average American. And that if you raise the salary high enough, then there's going to be fewer barriers to entry for working class people to run for these offices and achieve better representation. So that's my personal hobby horse. I imagine that polls horribly, but I felt like I should sling some hot takes here.
Charlie, that is an unpopular opinion that we share, and one I have worried about here in this state, where if you don't have the income or the ability to leave your job for 3 to 4 months, you can't run. So that really narrows down who is able to run and the professions that are able to be in our legislature. So I also share that unpopular opinion.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Okay, Charlie, that was a lot. I think we covered a lot of territory. So now I'm really curious, what is your pick of the week?
So my pick of the week has to do with the Boise City Council and a series of town hall meetings that each of these council members have set up over the next few weeks. So each member is having either a different town hall meeting or a joint town hall meeting with a neighboring council member in or around their districts. They'll be providing residents with sort of the opportunity to engage with the council member, to ask them questions. It's supposed to be in a conversational format. And so, it's especially if you're feeling a little powerless or frustrated maybe by the state legislature or at the national level with all the news going on this week, this is a really good way to get involved, get to know your city council member. One thing about this that I think is really interesting is that just a few years ago, Boise underwent this districting process for the city council. We're still kind of getting used to having these geographic-based districts rather than what we would call at-large districts, right? Having everybody be elected citywide, which is what we used to have. And there was a lot of debate about this at the time, and I think, honestly, good arguments on either side. But the split-up districts are what we ended up with, and I think these kinds of town halls are a really nice way to capitalize on one of the main advantages of this system, which is having smaller, closer-knit communities where people know each other a little better, where you can form some familiarity. And so hopefully you get this closer and friendlier relationship between Boiseans and the council members who represent them. And, this is certainly on my mind, especially with the news that just broke the other night about the Idaho Supreme Court's ruling against the council's what the court said was basically an unlawful or sort of code-breaking approval of the interfaith sanctuary on State Street, basically saying it was a code violation. And so, if this is an issue that you have thoughts about, that you want to weigh in on, then these town hall meetings could be a good time to make your voice heard on what you think the next steps should be for the city council.
Yeah, I'm really glad that they are making themselves available to people in this way. I think sometimes it can feel intimidating to go and testify at a city council meeting or to, be trying to figure out how to contact them or what to say. So it is really good to see that they're really engaging with their districts, especially in this time where there are some heightened political feelings. So
yeah, and there is a whole bunch of political science research that basically shows that where you as an individual citizen can have the most impact is at these local levels. So whether it's about the interfaith sanctuary or something else, I would definitely encourage folks to get out there. They do these town halls for a reason. They are listening. And the only way you're going to make that difference is by getting out there. So I hope folks do that. Lindsay, how about you? Let's hear your pick of the week.
Now I feel a little silly because yours was very get involved, be involved in your community. And I'm like, here's a minute of escape. So that
Lindsay, I think we've demonstrated we need some escape in this show. So
mine is definitely more escapism based. So my pick of the week is the Under the Freeze Winterfest, January 25th from 5 to 10 p.m. They have tickets available online. Now I'm not going to say where it is because the location is actually on the ticket. And so I don't want to be a spoiler. I don't want to spoil it. That's part of the it feels exclusive. But go to their social media, go to the Under the Trees website, and they have everything in their link tree. You can find them on Facebook, Instagram, but it's going to be electronic music, EDM music. It's bright lights. They're going to have hot toddies, warm drinks. For anybody who's listened for any amount of time, I don't like to be cold. I don't like that. Winter is hard for me, so I'm really excited about this. This is something I'm willing to brave the cold for, is a music festival. And so it's, bright lights, great music. I am actually a really big electronic and EDM fan. So I'm so excited to see this happening in Boise, and I'm ready to just go dance and have a great time this weekend.
Yeah, a lot of movement, maybe a liquid layer or two helping out things there. I think probably after the last couple of weeks, we could all use something like that. So I'm all for it. EDM has not traditionally been my thing, but as we often do on the show, Lindsay, you're opening my horizons here. So I'll have to check out Under the Freeze. I
would say, Charlie, I highly recommend checking it out. Something about dancing communally is just so fun. So it's the perfect music to do it. So I do recommend it if you need to just take a break, clear your mind for a couple of hours, rejuvenate, get back into it. That's going to be my pick of the week. Yeah, find some community, whether it's at a city council meeting or dancing to some EDM. Before we wrap up, I want to tell you about something new we're doing. Starting Monday, we're debuting a brand new segment to break down what's happening in the legislature, the wildest things lawmakers are saying and doing, plus how you can get involved. That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. The show is produced by Evelyn Avitia, Frankie Barnhill, Francisco Kilgore, and me, Lindsay Van Allen. Blake Hunter writes our Hey Boise newsletter, and our music is by Up Is the Down Is The. Don't forget to join us again on Monday. See you then.